This conference will now be recorded.
Here. Vice Chair Leanne Maloney. Here. Jane Allen. Here. Dylan Vaness. Aubrey Kircher. Dan Fitzpatrick. Aaron Brown. Santino Provenzano. Stacey Day. Ben Elshewski. Here. Amelia Brown. Bob McConnell. Here. Jeff Craven. Chris Cooley.
Here.
Dave Whitford.
Here.
Scott Browning.
Here.
Sean Sullivan.
Here.
Brandon Miller. Juanita Bernal-Leon.
I'm here on the phone. Good morning, everybody.
Liana Dixon. Chris Pratt. Felicia Burks.
Here on the phone.
People talking online and we're not hearing them in the room.
Can you hear me?
Correct.
I can hear you, Felicia.
Those folks online, bear with us. We're trying to get audio into the room from people first. Alicia is online.
Yeah, we have a number of people. We have Chris Cooley online. We have a caller who is probably Viviana.
With Chris Cooley online, we do have a forum share. But we just wait to make sure we get everybody counted.
Juanita is online.
We do that.
Thank you, everybody. Let's, moving on to the agenda, we're going to go on to two. There are no changes to the agenda, so we're looking at approval of the minutes from the August 12th Management Board meeting.
I'll work on that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, motion to approve, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, item 3, we have any citizens that would like to speak? Either online or I don't see any present. See anything online, Ryan? Nope. All right, so we'll move on to action items. Ed is going to go over the quarterly financial report and final 2022 program-wide budget.
On page 9 of your packets is our financials to Q4 of fiscal year 2022, which ended September 30th this year. As you can see, in terms of revenues and expenses, we're probably about 75 to 77% activity that we're expecting for fiscal year 2022. In total, we received about 2.79 million in revenues to accomplish all the projects this year. A number of the contribution and donations went up than what we were expecting going into this fiscal year. That supported some of the 30th anniversary celebration and basis conference. In total, we're a little bit behind in terms of fees and contract revenues, and that just reflects the activity that we're expecting to close out in fiscal year 2022 that will, in essence, carry over into the new fiscal year. On the expenses side, there's 4 categories we're a little bit over in terms of our budgeted expenses. Our insurance rates went up fairly significantly. So the first quarter of fiscal year 2023 is typically paid out of the prior fiscal year. So we had a slight increase in our board liability insurance. We purchased some additional equipment for new staff coming aboard. So we went a little bit over in terms of our capital outlays and small equipment, hardware and software line item. And then printing and our other expenses also exceeded our budgeted expense categories for this year 2022. We have a little bit more printing expenses for the State of the Day report. And then our other expenses encompass a lot of the 30th anniversary celebration basis expenses, and that was about 73,000 of that other expense category. We also had to pay some legal ad costs for noticing our budget that were a little bit higher than we were expecting. But in total, those 4 expense categories, although we're a little bit over, they're more than absorbed in other categories where we're well under in total, we had about 2.5 million in expenses. Again, a little bit below what we were targeting for this past fiscal year. All those projects that did not get accomplished in fiscal year 2022, those expenses just roll over to the next one. We still are managing active grants, and it's just a matter of timing of when those expenses are incurred in a particular fiscal year. So in total, these numbers in the quarterly report will go to our auditor as our final fiscal year 2022 program-wide budget, and then make any necessary additional adjustments to accruals that were not recognized in this quarterly report that were reviewed by CRI. That audit will come back to the board at the February meeting. But other than that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have on the quarterly financials and our final fiscal year 2022 program-wide budget.
More questions for Greg? All right, this is a voting item, so the recommend policy board will, we recommend that the policy board accept the quarterly financial report and adopt the final 2022 program-wide budget. We have a John. Okay, you got that?
Just a reminder, if you can say your name before you make a motion.
I made a motion, Dave Blitzberg seconded it. Do we have any additional conversation about this item? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, FY 2023 Florida Estuary Alliance and PVPP legislative priorities.
As we typically do at this November board meeting, we bring to you some of the talking points that we were going to utilize as staff as we meet with our local delegations, both at the state and federal level. A lot of these items are similar to what we've had before in the past in terms of relaying the top priority items where we'd love to see additional support to the state and federal legislatures. So a lot of the projects that we're focused on are focused on infrastructure improvements related to stormwater and wastewater, specifically to reduce nitrate loads to the bay. This year we're going to be calling out the Old Tampa Bay segment as well because it's consistently not meeting water quality criteria. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming agenda item relating to the regional assurance update later in the agenda. But this is, as you all know, a top priority for the program and where we want to focus a lot of effort in the future, not only to reduce nitrogen loads, but look at ways we can improve tidal circulation for the benefit of improving water quality conditions supportive of continued seagrass recovery, not only in that big segment, but statewide. On the federal side, a lot of the same priorities. Just wanted to point out that we're still trying to seek a designation of the Wild and Scenic River for the Willimantic River. There's been some activity as of late of this bill being moved to the House and now in the Senate. I think there's some concern that it might stall out in this legislative session, but we want to keep it a top priority for our region since it's been supported locally, both through the Hillsborough County DOCC and Manatee County DOC. To seek this designation from that river. So we want to keep it front and center in terms of our federal delegation to see if we can get that moving forward. That bill that's now at the Senate would basically authorize a study to occur to deliver a report to Congress on whether or not that river should be designated as a wild and scenic river through those federal authorizations. So with that, those are the main priorities that I just want to highlight. There's a fairly long list of where we're trying to direct resources, both internally and externally, as we bring them into the program and working with partners. But certainly any additional support to either the state or the federal government would help in our efforts to manage today. I will stop there, see if there's any questions. Our priorities for these legislative sessions.
Hey guys, get some caffeine over there, or
question. Ed, on the designation for the Willamette River, do you have any, I think it has to go to the Senate. And then they've only got, when's the session?
January, early January.
The idea of the probability. Ask you something.
I know there's discussion to that effect recently at Hillsborough County's board. I don't know how likely it will be to get that attached to other bills getting to the Senate. If not, you just have to start the process over again. Legislative session. Federal legislative session.
Any other discussion items? Hearing none, we are recommending that the policy board approve the FY23 Florida Shores Alliance and Shore Program legislative priorities. Motion.
Sarah Kessler, so moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. You get that? Any additional discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. 2022, 23.
We just want to, can we ask someone from that's attending virtually to unmute and see if we can hear them now?
Yes. Did you hear that? Let's see.
Alicia or Audrey or someone online, can you please unmute and try and speak to the room?
This is Viviana Bendixon from SwiftMud. I'm the one online calling in. It is very hard to hear you. I'm almost to the parking lot, so I'm not sure. I'm only catching bits and pieces.
Okay, thanks, Viviana.
Thank you.
Next agenda item, 2022-23 Bay Mini Grant Project.
So in your in your packet on page 11 and 12, you'll see a table outlining the 2022 Bay Mini Grant projects and their recommended budget. There's also a link to every one of the applications and a summary of each one of the grants that we received. So just as a reminder, Bay Mini grants are competitive cash awards that are offered to community organizations for projects that address restoration and education priorities in Tampa Bay. These grants are entirely funded through the Tarpon Tax Specialty License Plate. So Bay Mini grant requests for proposal were sent out to email lists, prior grant awardees, and other interested parties beginning in July. We received a total of 26 applications, totaling over $116,000 by the 26th of September deadline. And we had 5 CAC members volunteer to serve on the Bay Mini Grant Review Committee. Each grant was randomly assigned to 3 of the judges for review. And then the judges scored the application based on the strength of the proposal, the ability of the applicant to complete the project, cost justification, improvements in Tampa Bay, and community support. In addition, priority was given to cost-effective projects that supported the prevention, eradication, or management of invasive species in Tampa Bay. So the judges had about 2 weeks to review each one of the proposals that they were assigned, and then came together to discuss their findings during a virtual meeting on October 18th. So the executive director, Ed, finalized the finalized the recommended projects for the board consideration, taking into account restoration and education priorities, and the findings from the judging committee. So in total, 23 projects are recommended for full or partial funding for a total funding request of $99,511.28. And with that, I will entertain any questions.
I just have a general question about how the program works. You said it's a cash award. So people that are selected, do they just get a check like up front? And then what happens? Is there a circle back after? Like,
Yeah, so it's a reimbursement grant, so they have specific deliverables that they have to submit and in order to receive funding. And so they submit an invoice typically, or they purchase the materials for the grant, and then they submit an invoice typically about once per quarter, along with their quarterly reports, and any receipts backing up those purchases. And then from there, after I have time to review the deliverables and things like that, then they will receive a check of reimbursement.
We generally initiate that work through purchase order, and they have to provide receipts and costs incurred under the budget within that purchase order.
One question. On the two that didn't receive any funding, I was just curious as to why they didn't receive anything when they could do something to improve their application.
So we had 3 that did not receive any funding. And the reasoning behind that was either because they did not provide enough cost justification for where the funds were going, or that there wasn't enough information in the project proposal or in the project narrative to really understand where the funds were going to go and what they were hoping to achieve with the project. So typically with these projects that don't receive funding, I provide a letter indicating that they didn't receive funding this year, but here are some recommendations that you can incorporate to hopefully receive funding next year. I also encourage anyone who's interested in applying for an application or applying for a grant to reach out to me. And I make myself available to connect with folks and help them in developing their scopes.
Yeah, we certainly encourage them to apply again and get the resources that Sheila provides, either our webinar instruction on how to develop a proposal that would be competitive. We steer them in that direction for the upcoming data.
And I will just add on that, for the 2021-22 application period, we did receive a proposal from one of the Audubon groups, and they did not receive funding at that time. However, they did take the recommended the recommendations that we had suggested and that the Community Advisory Committee had suggested, and then reapplied this year and are receiving funding.
Question from Amelia Brown. Are applicants allowed to pair up and then seek double the amount of a typical grant?
Not typically. We don't usually do that unless they would have to apply separately. But the max amount of funds that any project can receive is $5,000.
Yeah, in the past, this is before Sheila's time, offered a higher funding level in the past, so it's on a case by year basis, and we'll really make that determination of making additional funding available, so like the $10,000 or $15,000 level.
Any questions from the board?
All right, so do we have, our action is to recommend that policy board approve the funding of the Bay Union grants based on the findings of the Community Advisory Committee and Executive Director recommendation.
David, let's move approval.
Motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Executive Director and staff reports.
Yeah, just keep the board some update. As your colleague recognized, we have a new staffer, Carrie Flurry, that Walia, who's the new restoration ecologist for the estuary program. She comes to us from the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. She's done some past research on live carbon habitats within the bay and understanding the fish utilization of those habitats. So excited to bring her aboard. She'll be in charge of a lot of the activities of the Habitat Restoration Consortium moving forward, and then also understanding the benefits of all the restoration investments we're trying to make in terms of restoring oysters and other critical coastal habitats throughout the region. So we'll turn it over to Carrie for a second, say hi, if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, hi, it's nice to meet all of you, and I look forward to working with you all in the future. Like Ed said, my background is in fisheries ecology, and I worked for Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for about 18 years. So I'm hoping to take some of the knowledge that I have locally within the Tampa Bay area to, improve our monitoring around restoration projects and, just participate in the process. So thanks for having me.
Great. And also just to give another update, we did extend an offer for environmental social scientist, and it was accepted. Dr. Blake Simmons, who's coming from Colorado State University, is planning to start with the program in early January this upcoming calendar year. So we're really excited to bring him aboard. Some of the work that he's conducted in the past is working on the human dimensions of conservation perceptions of the agricultural community within Australia. He's also been doing work with the World Wildlife Federation to understand lower perceptions on the work that federation does. So we're really excited to bring him aboard and help out with our initiatives to better engage the community as we move forward in our work, and also, try to get our message out to different aspects of the community that we perhaps hadn't served well in the past. So really excited to bring him aboard, and it'll be an excellent complement to our team. Also extended offer actually last night to an administrative specialist that was accepted. Looking to bring that administrative support into the program in early December. So we'll be up at about staffing at 9 with those 2 new members coming aboard. And with all the activity that we're now managing, we certainly need that level of support moving forward, and looking to do some great things with those key staffers. Other things that I want to mention, we did submit the proposal for the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we're receiving as a national SU program. That proposal will encompass the first 2 years of funding available to the program, to the tune of about $1.8 million. Working with you all and understanding where there's potential needs and how those needs might fit into the 2 restoration themes that were approved by these boards earlier this year with the full approval of our work plan, specifically focusing on Tidal Creek stormwater retrofit improvements and/or addressing aging wastewater infrastructure issues within the region. Those were the 2 themes that we were seeking project concepts from all the partners on. And working with you all, like I said, we identified 4 projects for these first 2 years of funds, specifically focused on that Tidal Creek restoration aspect, where we can contribute funds hopefully towards nature-based features of the designs that will not only address some of the flooding issues in underserved communities and areas within our region, but also help support the development of habitats within those project concepts that would support our long-term goals to restore those critical coastal habitats, as well as supporting any education initiatives that might develop as part of those projects and the communities where those projects are put. So the 4 that we move forward with in terms of the EPA proposal were the Joe's Creek restoration project in association with Pinellas County. There's a project at Little Bayou Creek at St. Petersburg, and then Gap Creek in Manatee County, and Archie Creek in Hillsborough County. So moving forward, we're hoping to get an agreement in place with EPA hopefully fairly soon, before the end of this calendar year. And at that time, we'd enter into contracts with each of the respective municipal governments that are going to be administering those larger projects with these. So hoping to get that work underway here fairly shortly in the first quarter of 2023 with you all. And as we move into next year, we also will need to develop an equity strategy plan for the remaining 3 years of that bipartisan infrastructure law funding and deliver that to EDA by June of 2023. So we'll be working on developing that overall strategy and the long-term plan for the overall use of those remaining bipartisan infrastructure law funds. So that still leaves about 2.7 million available for those 3 remaining years. Again, projects that would address those 2 restoration themes, supporting Title Creek restoration efforts and/or addressing aging wastewater issues within the region would be acceptable goals that we would submit in those future funding years. I'll pause there to see if anybody had any questions, but I wanted to give a fairly quick update on that, just to let you know that those were the projects we moved forward with in terms of the bipartisan infrastructure law. If not, I can move on. Also some good news, we're expecting some additional grant funding from 2 projects to come into the program. Actually, one has already began starting their second phase. Maya talked about the Blue Green Action Platform at the last management board meeting. That second phase of that grant that's funded through the National Science Foundation will further develop the curriculum and academy, working with communities both here and within the Mississippi and U.S. Virgin Islands to empower those communities to address pollution-related issues, specifically in our interest focused on nutrient pollution and nitrogen pollution to our coastal environment, but really empowering them to speak about other pollution concerns they might have that can be linked to those efforts to reduce nutrients to the coast. So I think we're really excited about that. She's working with the University of South Florida as the lead under that project, but it'll also help us develop, again, some of the more community interactions that we're looking to develop and engender throughout our watershed in a little bit meaningful way. So really holding stakeholder and workshopping events with those local communities to develop and round out the academy concepts. Other thing just to mention, and it's listed here as a pending official confirmation, but you might recall that we did submit a proposal to DEP's Restore Funded Priority List 3D solicitation earlier this summer. We're asking for about $13.5 million in funding to support a multi-jurisdictional stormwater master plan to be developed in the whole Tampa Bay watershed. So there's about $1.5 million that we were earmarking for that plan development, with the remaining $12 million dedicated towards actually implementing stormwater retrofits or whatever came out of that plan as appropriate projects, with the ultimate goal to address nutrient pollution and some of the water quality issues we're facing all today, but also potentially also using nature-based speakers to increase our resiliency and the habitats represented in that watershed. So although we have not received official confirmation of that grant, I have heard that they are moving that proposal forward for funding. It won't be at the $13.5 million that we requested, but it will be a fairly significant proportion. So we're expecting those resources and enter an agreement with DEP probably within the next several months for those significant resources to come to the region. That actual agreement and work would probably not commence until the October timeframe of 2023. But I want to put it on everyone's radar. It's expected to be a fairly significant amount of resources. They'll probably almost double our budget over the next several years in terms of the amount of resources that could be directly dedicated towards on-the-ground implementation of projects that will hopefully have a nutrient load reduction angle to them. So I'll stop there, see if anyone had any questions on those comments. I'm making this aware to you all just so that we can move forward once we receive official confirmation from DEP to start entering an agreement for those funds coming to the program. I also just wanted to mention that we co-applied for this grant with Regional Planning Council, so we will probably be the prime with DEP, but we'll probably be working through the Regional Planning Council and some way to fully implement the totality of that project, master plan initiatives as well as the actual implementation.
What's the timeline? How many years?
So our prior restore grants have been for up to 5 years. So I'm hoping, and the proposal that we developed encompasses about 3 years to develop the plan and then actually do some of the construction activities of aspects of that plan. We're not expecting the funds that we might receive to accomplish every project, that hopefully kickstarted some of it. Yes.
This has also been a time into the application that the district received, so can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so the first part of the grant, that master plan development, we have always worked looking for additional leveraging to get that plan accomplished. So in the grant proposal, we earmarked, we're asking for about $1.5 million in funding. So the CFI application to the district would help offset some of the costs for development of that plan. And then the additional grant funds will get towards the actual implementation of any projects that are identified, high priority projects that are identified. So just looking to, again, leverage as much resources as possible towards a worthy project, towards our priority areas where we know we have water quality issues. And any way we use and leverage available funding throughout the region, that, that's what we do as a program. Bringing that application to the district's consideration for the upcoming cycle. And that would align with the timing we're expecting for these restore funds to occur about October next year.
So the plan would be to not additional modeling or anything like that, but just really go to conceptual design. Is that what this $1.5 million will be doing?
Yeah, so actually the feedback I got from DEP is that we would have to go further than that. We'd actually have to go to actually design and permitting for at least some of those projects during development of that plan. And that's where the remainder of the funds that we'd be relying on for the restore, from the restore sources actually.
Is there a plan to, for design to be 100% designed and permitted?
Not for probably every priority that might be listed under that plan, but for enough to encompass what we're expecting from the restore grant.
Thank you.
And, with development of that plan, although we might not realize all those projects being implemented during these initial funding rounds, that we would use that to, again, leverage other grant resources to fully implement other high priorities that are listed. So that's how we're intending to use it as well. There's a number of resiliency grants that some of the projects might qualify for in the future, and that would probably make us more competitive if we had some conceptual or 30% designs for some of the projects, or other CFI funds as well in the future. So no other questions, kind of move on. This was another board discussion from prior meetings. We wanted to give you guys an idea of what we're going to be targeting for the upcoming 2023 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund priorities. So there's 5 bullet points at the end of my executive directory report, kind of highlighting where we're going to advertise as priority funding initiatives for that upcoming keeper call. And much of these priorities align with what I mentioned prior in terms of what we listen to our legislative priorities. Again, trying to focus on green infrastructure techniques that could be integrated into stormwater management, looking for ways we could address aging wastewater infrastructure issues in the region, and also projects that complement and further attempt to meet our habitat restoration needs for tidal creeks as well as upland habitats moving forward. On the education side, again, I think aligning with some of our new initiatives is creating greater awareness and science literacy within the region. So any projects that would address that, particularly in underserved communities for all these different priorities, would probably rank high for this upcoming keeper call. I think this year, we were expecting probably around 700,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in potential funding for this upcoming cycle.
I think that's a good place to,
So that'll be additional funding to direct towards these priorities for the upcoming year. Those requests for proposal will be advertised again around the early 2023 time period in January, and then we'll bring recommendation back to the boards in May after it's been reviewed. The funding entities represented in the Tampa Bay Environment Restoration. Leaving the space open now to see if there are other priorities that the management board is interested in us advocating for in terms of this upcoming T-bird solicitation. I think this was as a request of the boards previously, but we think these are probably good ones that align with where our focus is now. But if there are other ideas, we would welcome that as well.
I have a question. How do you define or determine which communities are underserved?
It's actually an evolving conversation, working through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. There's a process that we need to go through EPA to identify those underserved communities. There's a couple of screening tools they developed at the national level that we've used initially to identify some of the projects that we're looking to fund using that funding. But we will have to develop and define that strategy by June of next year to submit to EPA to come up with our locally relevant and agreeable definition for underserved communities in the region. And there's a couple different ways that could be looked at, and other entities within the region have identified underserved communities in a different way than the way EPA is looking at them now. So we'll be working with you all over the next several months to solidify that definition and how we're going to move forward with that identification.
I think for the purposes of T-bird and some of the things that we do that aren't necessarily funded through the bill, we've had a more flexible kind of working definition, and I expect that we'll probably keep that because in my professional opinion, mapping and defining these communities is not as important as just serving the watershed in an equitable fashion. And that can look a lot of different ways, and people can make a case for whether or not, they've been underserved and overburdened. And so I think we all probably have our own mental maps of where these communities exist. And so I'm not trying to really set out a really onerous process where it's like you're in or you're out for some of these other fundings. I think we're trying to signal what the value proposition we're looking for is, and we're open to hearing how the community defines that. We've always sort of been community-led and science-based, so that's important that we keep that ethic going forward in the places where we can.
I just had one comment on the third bullet, for the T-bird funding. I just wanted to make sure that flood control, be like a co-benefit, that water quality and the habitat piece of what, I don't know what the application is going to look like out there, but I would be afraid that you would just get a whole bunch of flood control projects if it's written in such a way that it's done for. So
It's an and.
I know.
And that's what the comprehensive is there for as well.
Yeah.
But I hear you.
It's just not, it's a co-benefit of the other two. It's not a primary benefit, I'm not picking.
I know you're not. I know you're
just
not.
gonna get inundated with pipe replacements and box culvert upgrades.
Comically, there's not a whole, most of these are iterations of priorities that we've had in prior years. This is one that's been on there for several years, and we haven't had a whole lot of takers. So I haven't been inundated with inappropriate projects yet. But I do hope folks notice T-bird has kind of swung to be pretty research heavy the past few years. And we have this opportunity to leverage, the bipartisan infrastructure law funds, potentially these restore funds from DEP. So we're really trying to encourage you all as our partners to think about the project that you maybe already have in the pipeline that could could be enhanced. So if it's a flood control project, but it could be enhanced with some habitat improvements, some more complexity, or, a water quality benefit. Those projects that are really like already moving and ready to go and could use some extra funds and be on the ground implementation. I think that's the intent of TBRF, is not to be, 10 research projects a year. It's to be a mix, and we've sort of gotten away from those implementation type projects. So, look at your CIPs. If you have those kind of things that are in the works, feel free to reach out to myself or to Jessica, and, we'd be happy to work with you to see if we can craft something that's meeting the intent where we think TBRF needs to be at.
And can you talk about TBRF, like what is the funding amount, and just kind of a brief overview? I think it help to frame the conversation, especially if entities are going to be thinking about their CIP project and what's available to them.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're planning to have $700,000 available for the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund for the 23 call. We may choose to supplement some of those funds with bipartisan infrastructure law money, should we have appropriate projects that come in. So this is the time where I'm going around and securing investments. And so some of you, seen the invoices already, the purchase order requests, and others I'm still asking and seeing. So I'm still firming up all of those commitments, but I think, typically we have somewhere around $700,000 for projects. Projects typically are in the $50,000 to $200,000 range. Last year, we said that it could be a project could be for a greater amount. We had that option of potentially applying bill funds towards TBRF as well. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, we saw very many research heavy projects and not as many implementation projects that met that intent. So not able to use those funds in that way. So they're not going to be your big dollar capital projects, but again, something like in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $200,000 enhancement to a project. It's required that you provide a match. That match can be through cash. It can be through in-kind services, volunteer services, your staff time, equipment, land purchases. There's a number of ways that you can reach that match requirement.
Yeah, thank you. And I do have another question. One of the other priorities, restore non-coastal native upland habitat to help meet the 2030 targets adopted in the Habitat Master Plan. Can you speak to that target specifically, like how much work has gone into it, how much is left to do, or are we just kind of starting? It didn't say specifics, so I just thought maybe that might help bring projects.
I don't have all of that information at hand to speak to, but what I can say is when we completed the Habitat Master Plan in 2020, one of the habitats that we saw the greatest amount of loss in was these non-coastal non-coastal upland communities, particularly things like pine flatwoods or palmetto prairies. So we're just interested in sort of giving that helping hand to those habitats that are being disproportionately lost to development or other pressures. So as always, TBRF will also, be any project that's implementing the Habitat Master Plan or our CCMP is eligible. These are simply priorities where we're trying to signal to folks the things that we think are the areas of greatest need and where the things that we think would be most competitive. So those non-coastal uplands are one of those areas where we haven't seen as much progress, nor do as many folks associate the Tampa Bay Estuary Program with these kinds of habitats. Frequently, I'm out there talking to land managers, and they'll say, "Oh, but this is way out here. You guys don't do that kind of work, or it's not a wetland, so you don't do that." And so it's also trying to make sure that folks understand that we are approaching the watershed comprehensively and all of the values that these different habitat types can offer.
By 2030, our target is 600 additional acres of upland habitats throughout the watershed.
Thank you.
When is this call?
It releases in January, and proposals are due in March.
What are the, after each bullet, W10, what is that?
Those are the actions in the CCMP, and usually when I put together the whole request for proposals, there's a hyperlink to that entire action.
That was it.
All right. Agenda item 8, the technical advisory committee report. I lost my partner over there. So, Aaron, you're out there. I miss you, buddy. All right. So the report is actually on page 15 of your packet. Summary of the 3 technical reports that have come out this period, 3 open science projects, presentations, and field work, as well as committee meetings. Our SHRM program staff have been involved in. I don't have any additional put on that. I did want to ask a question with regard to the Piney Point work that you guys are continuing to do. I didn't get the feedback in advance of Ian. I did send an email just asking, that's just when Ian was headed towards Tampa Bay, and I just was, wanting to make sure that there was some plan that.
From the receiver or from us?
Yeah, I sent it to the receiver and to me. I didn't hear back, not obviously anyway, but it was incredibly busy and scrambling at that point in time. But I just wanted, I was, obviously very concerned with volume of rain that we were expecting and everything. And I didn't really know, what the plan was there. I didn't know if you all had heard anything.
We did receive some notice of their operations, and they primarily were managing stormwater on site at that point. They are actually going to be presenting at the policy board meeting next Thursday. Herb Donica and Dr. Mark Burns, science officer of the state. So I encourage the Connecticut board members to tune in or come to that meeting in person. There's going to be a virtual link for that meeting as well. But they'll be giving an update on their operations due to storm and where they're at in terms of final closure of the well construction. Next Thursday is the policy board meeting. We do know after Ian, there was additional stormwater releases as well.
We understand that they ceased stormwater operations last Saturday, so they've done that.
I did want to say that the last TAC meeting was completely packed, which is great. We literally ran out of time, probably should have used another hour. It was very engaging. Love to see that. So again, continue to encourage folks to attend those meetings. A lot of great topics and a lot of interest in especially the some of the research on the red tide mitigation strategies and things like that. So please tune into those meetings. Please make sure you're encouraging your staff. I'm saying this because everybody's retiring around me and might be the elder sitting here right now. We need to grow. We need to grow this continue to grow the TAC and continue to grow the advocacy for this program. So please be inviting your environmental specialist ones that are just starting to tune into these meetings and listen and learn, because they're going to be sitting here and we need them engaged.
And not just listen and learn, create an environment where it's safe for them to ask questions and participate actively. I think that there were probably, like you mentioned, too many things on the agenda and not enough time for folks to really offer their expertise and their counsel on some of the topics that we provided. But it's important that we have that culture as a resource management community where folks feel safe to ask questions, feel safe to weigh in with their opinions. They can disagree with each other in a respectful manner, but really tell folks what they think, because otherwise, as we're seeing, these ideas keep clocking back around every so often, and people don't know if they don't hear what the real backstory is.
So it's just very important that that we're engaging all our employees. I literally was at the on the TAC meeting, and I always go to the list And I look and see how many of my staff are there, and I was like, I didn't see enough of them, so I sent out a blast. And I was like, here's the link. Stage Wednesdays. Yes, and all of a sudden, and things, if it gets busy, or they didn't, some of the newer staff weren't actually on the email list, so they didn't know.
And anyone can sign up to get on that email list directly from our website. If you need me to, I'll manually put you in there, but you can take care of it yourself. Anybody's welcome to sign up for the TAC email list.
So. The more the merrier. All right. Any other discussion items on the technical advisory committee report? Hearing none, we're moving on to agenda item 9, community advisory committee report.
The community advisory committee met on September 21st. We had 13 members there. We met via Zoom. There are also 3 community staff members there. And the CSD welcomed a new member, George Davis, who's appointed by the city of Clearwater. And at that time, the committee was assembled to, subcommittee was assembled to review the mini grants that was presented today. They approved the CSD. The staff briefed the CSD members on Pine Point status, which that was like about a week before we moved. At that time, we didn't know it was coming. They also briefed CSD on the updated state of the day report, and also got a new report from the Marine Degree Program on climate pollution, which was the main topic of the meeting. There are also presentations from Epic College and Keep House Beautiful on the topic of microplastic pollution, which is, a problem everywhere, but in Tampa Bay too. And then after seeing those presentations, the CSD members had a roundtable discussion of things that they could suggest to their community members to reduce microplastic pollution around Tampa Bay in the watershed. The members were encouraged to participate in National Estuary Week activities, because that was coming up, and also there were other activities that were coming up, and so those were discussed. And we're hoping to have the next CSD meeting in person. This one was on Zoom, but we're hoping the next one in January will be in person. And I'm sure it's going to be for that. So if anybody's got any suggestions on your meet,
Yeah, right now I think we're gonna have it in at their nature center, but
hard to beat.
yeah, pretty beautiful place.
I want to get out there now because all the Golden House for the if I didn't find it, before I couldn't find it, it's all over the place. To get some good staff.
All right. Discussion items. Anybody, reasonable assurance plan update.
Okay with you all, I'm gonna do the presentation from here.
The mic really close to you.
Yeah. Can you minimize the good meeting? So just wanted to give the management board an update. A lot of you are already participants in the nitrogen management consortium, but this is a fairly significant effort that we use on a 5-year rotational basis, looking at the quality of water in Tampa Bay relative to chlorophyll and numeric nutrient criteria that have been established for each of the major bay segments, and reporting that progress meeting with water quality goals and seagrass recovery in each of those major bay segments to DEP and EPA on those 5-year time scales. So we've been working on developing a draft reasonable assurance update plan. This is actually the 4th, I believe, going back to 2002 was the first one. And it's evolved since that early time period of developing the initial reasonable assurance and nitrogen management strategy for the bay. It's evolved to the point where we now have allocations for all prescribed nitrogen loading that goes into each of those bay segments and primarily managed to the participants represented in the nitrogen management consortium. So the activities that we work on in terms of in-house support as well as using our contractual support through Geniki Environmental is delivering those annual assessments over the 5-year reasonable assurance period. In this case, it's 2017 to 2021 that we'll be reporting on. We'll give them that water quality report. Integrated in that is the actual loading conditions that were experienced over that time period. And then we make an assessment relative to those allocations of each of the entities throughout the watershed and the overall loadings to each of the bay segments and deliver that information to the department. A big part of reasonable assurance, just like the BMAT process, is identifying projects that each department are working on to further reduce and help us meet those water quality goals. So we have always solicited through the action plan database additional nitrate and load reduction projects that our partners are working on. We have that online database, and we're trying to, in this round, look at other reporting tools that are being developed by the state UPs, BMAT reporting tools to see where we could reduce redundancy in reporting and perhaps integrate some of that BMAT reporting for the Althea, Hillsborough, and Manatee River BMATs into this RA process. So that's still somewhat of a work in progress because I would say that the project we received from partners to date are not comprehensive in the action plan database. We know there's a lot more work going on, but it hasn't been captured in the database. So we encourage your staff to get in there and enter those projects or make us aware of the tables and projects that were inserted in the DEP process that might align with nitrogen load reductions to the reasonable assurance plan. Another component that we usually do during this process is also if there's a need for any refinement of those allocations, we make those recommendations for the next 5 years of within the region. So the next 5-year period would be 2022 to 2026. So that's sort of the core of the activities that we've been working on and trying to finalize in a document that has gone out in draft form to consortium participants, as well as the Metropolitan Pulse board members represented in this room. And the final delivery of that report will be by the end of this calendar year, December 31st. Just to familiarize y'all with what we are tasked to do through that reasonable assurance assessment process. There is a defined framework of how we judge progress on those shared water quality goals for each of the bay segments. And they're predicated on meeting chlorophyll annual averages in each of the bay segments over that 5-year time period. Anytime where there's a trigger of those chlorophyll thresholds, 2 concurrent years, so 2 back-to-back years, then additional compliance assessment steps are needed and pursued by the consortium. And that's basically looking at the total loading going into the bay segment at first and see if that exceeds a hydrologically normalized load limit that has been established for each of the bay segments. And if so, then going down further into the NP specific levels to see where there might be some additional improvements that are needed. That isn't the case of what we're observing right now, and I'll kind of explain that. Jumping right into sort of the results that we'll be presenting, we know Old San State has issues. Over the past 3 years, we've been exceeding the chlorophyll annual average in that bay segment. And this is things that we've been bringing to consortium's attention, this body's attention, where we're focusing both research and restoration and infrastructure improvement dollars to address these issues. We know that these chlorophyll A exceedances are primarily attributed to the summertime blooms of particular harmful algal species called Pyridinium, and that this algal species not only probably respond to the nutrient loading conditions in that bay segment, but also other physical alterations that we need to make progress on and help improve in order to get us back under these defined numeric nutrient criteria. So again, that has been our priority area to do work, but we're also seeing overall declines in seagrasses throughout Tampa Bay. So that's also concerning from our standpoint of management and the estuary program. and how that might interface into the future work of consortium is a discussion that is going to probably continue to evolve over the next 5 years, especially if we continue to see seagrass losses, despite us meeting load limits in some of these basic. So just kind of highlighted all that. I got ahead of myself, but like I mentioned, the majority of seagrass losses that have been observed are in the upper bay segments, primarily in Old Tampa Bay. We lost about 4,000 acres of seagrass from 2018 to 2020. We're expecting an update on 2022 seagrass coverage here within the next several weeks. If you're interested in those updates, Chris Anastasio will be providing that, the updated seagrass maps throughout the Southwest Florida region at our upcoming Habitat Restoration Consortium meeting on December 14th. It'll be in draft form at that point, but I'll give us an idea of whether or not we're still seeing this decline in seagrass covered systematically or in select areas in the bay. But right now, like I said, our focus is on the upper bay segments, where we primarily lost about 4,000 acres of seagrass in Old Tampa Bay, and another 600 or so acres in Hillsborough Bay, and another 1,000 or so acres in the upper portions of middle Tampa Bay. So if we continue to see those declines, that is concerning. Should be concerning to this body as well as it's concerning to staff that should go forward. As I mentioned, the additional assessment steps that we work through the consortium are outlined in these Metro Management Consortium actions. So again, drilling down from the water quality conditions represented in each of the bay segments and whether or not there's an exceedance in 2 concurrent years. Looking at the hydrologically normalized loads to the whole Tampa Bay segment, that limit is 486 tons of total nitrogen delivered to the whole Tampa Bay segment on a yearly basis. The numbers represented for each of the RA reasonable assurance years from 2017 to 2021 are highlighted on that 4th row. And you see, when you take into consideration hydrology, we're actually well below that TMDL limit. And that has been a source of discussion of the consortium. Although we're meeting those load limits, we are not meeting water quality standards. We're seeing seagrass losses. So there's a disconnect there, particularly in this bay segment. And what we're proposing to do over the next 5 years is understand what the ecology needs now in terms of nutrient loads. So that we will probably be engaging the services of a support contractor to do an actual sediment capacity assessment for that whole Tampa Bay segment, at the very least over this next 5 years. Because we know both nutrient issues or nutrient loading is part of the puzzle, but there's other sort of complementary actions that we need to investigate as well. And what is the happy medium moving forward in terms of the diet that this bay segment needs to be on in terms of its nutrient loading limits with these other complementary actions being pursued at the same time. So it's probably going to invoke a little bit more conversation with concerning because we have these defined limits. We fully allocated those loads to each of the entities. But we're not now seeing the ecological response despite those limits in this particular bay segment. And I know change is often hard to encounter, but we need to work through that process as a region if we truly want to get this bay segment back on track. And as I mentioned, we're not expecting good news with this latest seagrass report, so that just continues to press the fact that we need to do some significant work in this bay segment.
Does everybody understand the process? Like, I know some of you participate in nitrogen management consortium meetings. I'm not trying to be like productive, but if people don't and understand, it's a little opaque. So does everybody feel like comfortable that they understand the process that he described? What's that?
I would say we'll have to just run through it. In terms of that framework, or so at the onset of the program, we developed loading targets for each of the bay segments. These were total load limits that we thought would be supported the water quality conditions that encourage continued seagrass recovery. For the most part, we've been meeting those loading targets. In a few cases where that hasn't occurred, we've still been exceeding water quality conditions, that water quality indicator that we rely on tell us how well we're doing in terms of each year of Tampa Bay. Through the course of the next management consortium, there's been an evolution from those being voluntary-based targets to regulatory requirements. So there's now federally established TMDL based on those loading targets. And from that, we've developed and further split the total load limits to individual permittees throughout the region. So those individual permittees have the responsibility of meeting those individualized load limits that ultimately feed up to federally recognized TMDL. When I talk about hydrologically normalized loads, that's taking into account the variation of basically rainfall on a year-to-year basis and scaling those load limits to the observed rainfall conditions relative to the establishment of those original load limits. And that's why there's sort of a disconnect now between total loads and hydrologically normalized loads. Up until this past RA cycle, we've been fairly consistent meeting water quality criteria. So those limits, both at the total level and the normalized level, were viewed through the department as providing reasonable assurance that will continue to meet water quality criteria supportive of seagrass moving forward. The disconnect during this RA cycle has been Old Tampa Bay, and some of the now observations of seagrasses lost throughout the Tampa Bay region. We have not experienced losses in seagrasses like we've seen since 2016. So there's never been 3 concurrent cycles of loss of seagrasses in our history of measuring seagrass coverage by the Water Management District. This period of time between 2016 and with the new results, might be 3 concurrent assessment periods where we've seen seagrass losses. And again, that's sort of troubling in terms of where we stand in terms of trying to restore water quality. Our paradigm has always been predicated on those uses of these targets. So in particular in Old Tampa Bay, there has been a disconnect. So there might be a need to adjust that TMDL load target for Old Tampa Bay moving forward to meet water quality in the future. And that's some of the activities that we're planning to do over the next 5-year period. We're not saying what that limit is until we do actual additional studies and understand what level of nutrient loads might have an impact on these pyrolytic winds moving forward, as well as, like I said, other complementary actions that might support nutrient load reductions in the future. So there might be a need to reallocate for that phase segment in particular in the future to meet a new limit moving forward. We've been kind of rolling this out to the consortium in the past, and again, it'll be another evolution of how we manage the bay, and I look at it as sort of an adaptive management approach. We know the bay's ecology has been changing. We know other stressors are involved with us meeting water quality criteria moving forward. So the limits and targets that we might have established back in the 1990s might not hold now. So as part of the consortium process, that's the work that we're going to try to address.
A part of what we've also been doing is try to facilitate these conversations on additive actions that we can do, because our management paradigm isn't really making sense in this bay segment anymore. We're looking at, so it's not just this clear relationship between nitrogen loading, water clarity, and seagrass. There's other factors going into play. So that's why we've been talking a lot about hydrologic alterations and circulation. So we're talking about the Lake Tarpon Alcohol Canal, Channel A and G, Channel 5 from Roosevelt, all these ditched stormwater systems that are delivering more fresh water to that bay segment and are affecting the hydrologically normalized load. We're also looking at how things like climate change is maybe changing the baseline and potentially affecting primary productivity in that bay segment. So is Old Tampa Bay, it's shallower than other bay segments? Is it warmer? Is that causing heat stress that's, also affecting the seagrasses? How are all these things interplaying? And the reason we're asking all these questions is we're trying to give you more tools in your toolbox as managers, because right now, the management paradigm is set up where if our water is not clear and we're not supporting seagrasses, what we can do is we can regulate your nitrogen load to the bay. We're trying to say there are potentially other levers to pull to make water quality conditions supportive of seagrass, because there are other factors that are confounding what's going on. So some of these conversations that we're trying to advance through the Nitrogen Management Consortium are a little bit to the side of what the Nitrogen Management Consortium is doing. That's why we're talking to you all about it too, trying to make sure that you kind of see this problem, at least how we see the problem, and then if you see it differently, this is the kind of place that we want to engage in that discussion. What we're trying to say is that there's these big things that are coming down the line, and so making sure you kind of understand all these moving parts is really important. And that regulatory framework and the decision framework that Ed's trying to talk about is sort of the trigger point in driving it right now. So you need to understand how that works. You need to understand the changing ecology, and then we need to put together the pieces about what we can do about it. So. You can interrupt and just chat, because that's like what this needs to be.
No, absolutely. When Deb was talking, the first thing that jumped into my mind is that, we need to stop focusing so much on loads, and we have to look at the other factors that are going on here, because, we can continue to try to get blood from a rock on treating stormwater down more and more and more. And, we all need to focus on that. That's not an issue, but at some point in time, we have to look at, the circulation. We have to look at the sediment. So we're looking at internal nutrient recycling. What is going on there? Because we can spend a whole lot of money and not get where we need to be if we're not focused on the right problem. And I'll use a little microcosm of that as Lake Seminole. We have a reasonable assurance plan very much like the one for Tampa Bay. But we had to get DEP we had to provide a whole lot of science so that they understood that this wasn't a load issue. They wanted 90% load reductions, nitrogen and phosphorus. We were like, we're never going to get there, and that's not the entirety of the problem. We had to demonstrate the science that showed that over 50% of the problem was actually sitting in the bottom of the lake. And that was the load. That was the problem. And, they bought into that as, a BMP, that would help, resolve, water quality issues. But I hesitate to sit here and say, continue just shutting down. So we got to adjust the loads. We got to adjust the loads. We don't actually truly understand that it's the loads that are the problem. So, I realize we're in the red, and we've got for those of you who haven't seen the decision flow chart, we're in trouble. So we have to take action. I understand that part, but I think we need to, really be looking at the totality of the issue and not just, blindly focusing on, I guess we need to reduce load reductions.
Right, if you can go back to the slide, it's the ultimate load.
Yeah, I think, with that recognition, we've done the modeling to suggest get rid of all the point sources, you get rid of 25% of the stormwater, you probably have a response, but whether or not that's realistically can implement that is another conversation. So if that's not realistic, then there's these other complementary actions that need to be implemented in order to get water quality back on track if they're not attacking it strictly from a nutrient standpoint. And that, I think, will be sort of the evolution I'm talking about over the next 5 years. I'm not suggesting that the TMDL needs to be really ratcheted down, but there's probably some refinements that need to be made. And despite those refinements, we're still probably not going to meet water quality standards consistently in this bay segment because of the nature of the higher bending. So what are those other complementary activities inclusive of these additional nutrient load reductions that would get us that kind of track. And that's, I think, what we need to have a conversation on through this body and through the measurement.
Yes, and
Yes.
when you look at this chart, this load, the non-normalized load, that relationship looks different for Old Tampa Bay than it does for other bay segments. The downward trend is not there in this bay segment. So, I think Kelly split it in, but, nitrogen loading is still really important, and we haven't made as much progress in this bay segment. So it's important that we continue, to stick to that bread and butter. It just has to be complemented with these other things, because we don't think that controlling the nitrogen load is sufficient to get us to the end state that we want. I don't know how much you guys have dug into like these and like you've seen like the trends in this space segment when it's not normalized. So I think this is important.
Is this purely modeled based on EMCs and gauge loads?
So the top graphic is the total load from the 7 sources estimated by GNFE. It's inclusive of industrial and domestic point sources, as well as model and actual loads from the gauge basins.
Do you expect any improvements from Centerville 64 with the discharges in this segment? I don't know if there's any wastewater treatment discharges.
There are, and we're having conversations with those entities. We have always advanced the notion of doing more with reclaimed for the benefit of reducing nutrient loads directly discharged today. So we definitely would love to see additional projects that would support that activity in the future.
But that reclaim has to have a reduced nitrogen load in it as well.
So that would be significant reductions there. Although I think maybe the time frame is 2030 or 2032, some time out in the future to get that implemented.
Under that sustainability, that is still like 10 years off.
My tackling the example from Kelly is we have the same situation in our lakes as well. And, there's always been a thought that the region was contributing to the extent of the building that was resulting in the group. But it turns out, going back looking at the flushing and actually the sediment, and I think that over that period of time has resulted in the actual 60% of the nutrient. It's actually not coming from the soil. And not coming from the nutrient. So the user contribution is actually the sediment that's been in the density. And it's now starting to build up and release that slope and continuously. And that's what results in the completely agree with it. It's how we, I probably say it's probably going to be this community, it's probably going to take more of that time for the overall the flushing and monitoring analysis of the basin itself. The hydrogen is also review it and different techniques on that side.
I think certainly there has been a research need to understand the internal contributions to nutrients. Everything we're talking about in these graphics are external nutrient load sources. Through, I think, through that similar capacity assessment, we'll hopefully get a better understanding of what that internal load contribution would be. And from that standpoint, there's probably totally different actions at that point to potentially proceed to address that.
Yeah, I've had an issue prior to things that every time we have a flu, where I just fed and enhancing what they're to initiate.
Yeah, and the viability of this are onward of the decade. Yeah, so again, I think some of our focuses with our research initiatives is looking at ways to less that. Change the physical nature of resident times or swimming conditions that might not be supportive of future pirate income. So it might be out feed either out non-harmful outdoor species in the future. It's a sort of daunting task to address, but my fear is if we don't take this serious, particularly in the Old Tampa Bay segment where we've seen higher denium, we're likely to see other more noxious species come in, like has occurred in Indian River Lagoon. Higher denium was the first indicator there in 2010, 2011 period. Now they're dealing with all sorts of brown tides, cyanobacteria wounds in those areas that are similar in nature in terms of long residence times and water quality conditions that we see in all Tampa Bay segment. So we need to continue to be vigilant. Like I said, I think on continuing nutrient load reduction, obviously in this bay segment, but they're going to need to do and implement other complementary actions as it relates to the hydrologic the urbanized conveyances or discharging into this segment, as well as the impediments to tidal circulation that are fostering these long residence times in areas where we see the fire. So has been our multifaceted strategies. It's how we wrap that all up in terms of presenting that to the department and EPA as a way to move forward to continue to maintain reasonable assurance that we're going to meet water quality criteria in the future in this bay segment and throughout.
Well, who makes those decisions about, who want to include water in that segment? Who makes some changes to the causeway? What's standing in the way of progress there?
There've been projects implemented. There's been a causeway breach on the east side of Fort Campbell Causeway. The city is investigating some areas on the western side of Fort Campbell. We've encouraged the Department of Transportation to look at the Howard Franklin Bridge, the western approach. We're in the midst of developing another proposal to really interrogate whether or not additional causeway operations will have a significant impact with higher denium in the future, which hopefully would provide additional cost justification to actually implement those projects for limitations that have resisted it up to this point. So that's the process we're operating under right now.
So Florida Department of Transportation owns the causeway, and so they're ultimately the ones responsible for, deciding, how to modify the infrastructure, should they, be interested in doing that. Like Ed mentioned, there are reasons that they have chose to pursue causeway modifications on portions of the Fort Campbell that are tied to regulatory incentives for mitigating some of the expansion projects that they've done on the expressway elsewhere, where building, a bunch of stormwater ponds is going to be cost prohibitive. So doing something like a causeway modification that would lift and provide benefit for seagrass resources, similar to what a nitrogen load reduction would do, made more economic sense. The challenge is, how do we measure success for these kinds of projects? When there's a regulatory incentive and a cost incentive, it's easy for the Department of Transportation to make that decision. But when we're talking about proactively managing the bay, there's not a regulatory incentive for them to do it. It's going to be, costs in the tens of millions of dollars, and we're not clear on how to measure success, then it becomes really hard to get that cost benefit to come out in favor of making these kinds of modifications. So one of the things that we're working on in this proposal that Ed mentioned is making sure that we're not modeling like a nutrient load reduction associated with a causeway modification, but instead we're better understanding the parameters that are contributing to pyridinium growth and loss, and that we can perhaps quantify those benefits and judge whether or not it makes economic sense to do those based on these other criteria that we're working to define. But if you just look at a causeway modification and a nutrient load reduction, it does not take a PhD to tell you that it's going to be hard to make the math work out on that. So again, it's these things like we have a way of managing the bay, and when we use those systems, it becomes really hard to make Old Tampa Bay make sense. So we have to think about a new way, to make the systems function. So we're all in like kind of new territory with each other. That's sort of why we're trying to make sure that people are asking these questions and having these conversations. There's no stupid questions here. I don't know how many times Ed and I and others are, in the office and, I don't know what to do about Old Tampa Bay. So we're going to muddle through it.
Seems like that you can tie the water quality improvements to changes in residency time. You should be able to tie the residency time to the changes in the infrastructure. Circulation. So, yeah, I don't think it, but specifically going to be looking at that in terms of the study.
Yeah, and in prior iterations, we've approached it from that standpoint. That it's sort of arbitrary, what is enough in terms of residence time, and that's sort of this next step of is a 10% reduction in residence time disproportional, and they make a significant impact in reducing fire rate. That's sort of the success criteria that we need to provide to make cost justifications to achieve those projects. But yeah, that will be one of the indicators that we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, it just seems like we're at a kind of a unique time in the state, and there's a lot of money and a lot of interest on water quality. And that may not always be the case. So I feel like there's opportunity, like if there's signs of plan.
Yeah, to develop that science and plan, it'll probably take a couple of years, and those funds might not be available.
Yeah.
And just like a step back, that's kind of what we're struggling with the bipartisan infrastructure law too, is, we've got a lot of federal resources available for implementation projects, but we don't have a lot of projects that are ready to go. So, we need to be positioning ourselves in a more appropriate fashion to take advantage of these moments when these things exist, because they don't last forever. And that's kind of what's making things a little bit challenging right now.
Let me ask the question so we what are the categories that go with the student projects? And because I do know that one of the stuff costs that is long. And then continuous logistics are from 50 coming up. But one of the topic things that we are looking at that you can share with us to have come to as we all look at LCA stuff.
Say that last part.
So a lot of us as agencies are looking at some capital improvement plan projects right now. So one of the topic parts from the process with infrastructure program that you are looking at, if you could share that with us, then give us an idea which ones you specifically looking at, so we can take those LCAPs and see what projects we can enhance and improve, policy projects.
So I think we're primarily focused on the NEP portion of it, which is what we've been talking about over the course of this year. And that's frankly going to be relatively small dollars from the perspective of many of you all. There are a number of other ones available that we haven't really been actively tracking or sharing. But if that's, we're here to serve you all as our, as our partners. And so if there's a need there, or you have projects that you think are identified, but you need to match them with a funding source, we need to hear that from you, that that's something that you need from us. So right now, like I said, we're just focused on the NEP portion, which is a little less than $5 million.
All right, well, I'll definitely share whatever we can reference here. So I'll definitely share with you what the projects that possibly.
Perfect.
I think as we move forward, that idea of what work is planned by our partners, the way we can leverage additional funding to the disaster program directly, or help our partners seek additional grant funds before we implement those projects. Some of the things we're talking about that have co-benefits, like lease addition, that's the way we serve the region. We need to get an idea of what those projects are comprehensively, implemented at first, but probably throughout the watershed, especially if we continue to see seagrass declines in other areas. But the only thing that Owen mentioned, bring up is that the draft document was sent out to the consortium. There's links within this presentation and to the shortage impact. Please take a look at that document. If you don't agree with some of the information that we presented, this is primarily developed through staff, but we're presenting it to the consortium at this upcoming November 15th, right? Yeah. Consortium, we're going to be receiving comments from the consortium. We want to receive comments from the management board as well on that plan moving forward. And if you don't agree or you think there's alternative approaches that we need to consider over the next 5 years, we want that input.
We're hoping you don't agree with the projects that we've identified. We're hoping you've done a lot more than what's in there, because it's not keeping pace.
Yeah, so the, under section 3, I have listed here, there's a description of proposed management actions. That's where we outline the projects that were implemented over the 2017 to 2021 period for the ongoing education projects that the partners have received since the inception of the consortium and all the work that has been going on in the region and is still ongoing, going all the way back to the 1990s. And then any future planned projects that are not inclusive of some of these CFP projects, we want to know about those as well. And if they have a nutrient load reduction benefit or co-benefit, then we want to insert that into this document, just to let regulators know it's not that we're not doing things in the Tampa Bay region. It's just that we need to sort of consider where the debate's at in terms of its present ecology. And maybe those other activities that aren't listed within these tables need to be perceived a little bit more strongly in the future, like causeway operation growth or other things to address the inputs into Old Tampa Bay and reduce the residence time in that basin. So that's what this plan represents. It's supposed to be a proactive plan to prevent a state TMDL from being established. And moving forward, this is sort of the proactive approach that we're going to engage in as a community to keep the bay back on track with certain water quality criteria. If the state doesn't agree with this plan, they don't have to give us a reasonable strength determination, and we could go a different regulatory route under that premise. We want your input and feedback on whether or not what we're proposing moving forward is going to be adequate to help us collectively meet those goals that we have, the ESHRE program and individually as a community representative and benefit all of them. So with that, I think, that's the big question, right? Is we know we're sort of on this declining path. We have some issues in Old Tampa Bay. We'll have some new numbers for 2022 seagrasses, but I think we're receiving some warning signs in some of the bay segments that we need our management of the bay needs to evolve to a certain respect, and we need to start thinking holistically on what needs to be done. And it might go beyond just nutrient reduction. We did a lot of that discussion, but I'd be happy to kind of talk through that. My translate what I'm saying better.
We're all just depressed now.
No. This is our challenge. It's our time. No, I'm with you. You got great now.
All right, so any additional discussion at this time on this item? I'm sure there's going to be plenty of discussion going forward.
Well, our lines are always open. If you get a wild hair or, want to talk about this stuff, just give us a call.
All right. Informational items. Mike?
In your packet, there's a screenshot of the dashboard that's summarizing the quarterly progress made on the whole host of projects that all of our staff are managing to date. So you can also click on the link and then you ought to be able to go and drill down a little bit deeper into any of those projects. If you would like to get walked through how to do that or have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly about individual projects. We also have the meeting dates, the proposed meeting dates for 2023 at the end of your packet. So please, we'll send out a calendar placeholders, but block those times off, and we're looking forward to working through all these fun challenges with you all next year. The next meeting will be February 10th, right here in this room.
And just one couple other additional reminders, if you're interested in terms of the Pine Point update, I have a policy board meeting next Thursday, November 10th. The receiver will be providing that. Feel free to tune in, open to the public to attend. Beyond that, the consortium will be meeting on November 15th to review this regional firms document and start having those conversations that Kelly alluded to. And then at our Habitat Restoration Consortium meeting on December 14th, we're anticipating the rollout of new 2022 seagrass numbers. So if you're interested in where the data is at currently in terms of the seagrass coverage, we'll have an update there. And the conversations we're going to have with next year have a better managed today.
Just a couple of announcements. From an EV perspective, this room with the council has authorized a significant investment to improve the EV situation in this room. So the lead time is longer than typical because of supply chain issues, but I've signed a contract, so if you've been being patient, I can guarantee the audio visual in this room will be enhanced significantly over the next 7 months. And we'll time that so it doesn't interfere with anybody. There's no need to leave for this room to be pretty much shut down. Microphones will be on the ceiling, and just be easily on. And certainly a modernization of our current setup that we really just adapted to COVID, kind of forced us to, and we appreciate your patience. Also, we're having our annual resiliency summit, May 4th and 5th, which is a Thursday and Friday. We'll be held at the Prairie Woods in St. Pete Beach. Generally named in this region is a very nice time. So we're hoping that our attendance is even better than we typically have. We have about 300 to 450 people. We anticipate perhaps a different location. We'll have a better attendance. So the registration will be made available, if you will, after the new year. But you could just kind of put that on your calendar for now. We are going to do the beach as a feature for the sea level rise demonstration. It's something to that effect. I don't quite think 100% there, but since we're on the beach, it just makes sense to build the beach end as a feature for the event. So we're pretty excited that you have ideas. We are all ears. We're in the process of planning, but we're not going to have all plenary with the breakout sessions as well this time. The venue was just so again, we're always looking for ideas, but please keep that in mind. We're also welcome to that. Thank you.
Any other announcements, folks, from the show?
So we had our open science subcommittee meeting earlier this week, and I made the announcement that we are actually going to be holding an open science training early next year, February 2nd, and registration is currently open for that. I think we're capping about 40 people, but it will be in person. And this is really part of our effort to develop this broader community practice among our partners for using open science principles for making science more accessible, findable, reproducible. Obviously science is the core of our organization. And I have the opinion that open science is the better way to do it. And so this training will, I think, expose attendees to specific tools and methods of doing open science. So if you have staff members that are interested in attending, please let me know. I can definitely send out that registration. It's not anywhere on our website yet, but it is open and it is going to be available on our website at some point. But it's pretty long. Yeah, it is going to be at the district office in East Tampa in person. So look forward to that.
Any other announcements? I did want to share that next Tuesday from 9 to 3:30 is
we co-host a green infrastructure conference with the University of Florida each year. It keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's virtual, so you can sign up for it if you're interested. It's from 9 to 3:30, it's Tuesday. I also, if you receive sanitary sewer services from Pinellas County, just as a reminder, the sewer lateral rebate program is open, so it can help cover the cost of your inspection, as well as up to $3,500 for repairing your lateral.
Can you share shareables with us?
Yeah, all in the spirit of reducing I'll send those links to you. And I know our utilities department is getting ready to implement the Find and Fix program here, so that's for specifically defined areas within their service area, especially in some of our some disadvantaged communities, where they will be actually going in doing inspection, and where they find field laterals, they will be repairing them. So that's a great program.
Question.
Sure.
How many rebates are you anticipating?
Until the money runs out. I don't know how many millions it is, it's a lot of money. But until it's open until the money runs out.
No, is that for, rules that are cut off on age?
No, the criteria are all there. It's just, it's really about, it's really about reducing, stuff going into the sanitary sewer that's not supposed to be there, whether it be groundwater or stormwater. Which then obviously has an impact on SSOs and stuff like that. So this is a huge operational benefit to our utilities department, but it also is a huge environmental benefit and public safety benefit for all of us. And then the other project I just wanted to share, and I think this is funded by our Restore Act, so the direct component that comes to the county. We did millions of dollars. We have a lot of older mobile home parks that have collection systems that then discharge into the county system, having all the same problems that a field lateral does. They're incredibly old, they're not maintained, and they're failing, and we have multiple mobile home parks where they have signed on, we will be going in there, completely removing and replacing their existing system, and then they will become customers of our utilities department. But again, we are targeting areas where where that is going into water bodies. So so there'll be some benefits there as well. So there's a lot going on there with regional biosolids group. There's our utilities department's been heading up a regional discussion about biosolids in this area and a regional facility that can handle biosolids disposal, and processing versus any type of land spreading efforts. I know that, here, right locally, we don't land spread, but our stuff does land spread in other areas, and it does have impacts to the greater environment. So there was a meeting up last Friday, so those conversations are going on, and just seeing the feedback from those meetings is incredibly positive. Everybody understands that this is a significant issue, and we need better tools in the toolbox to address it. So that was very interesting. I also wanted to congratulate Stacy for finishing the read out at Philippi Park phase 3. This has been a labor of either love or hate, I'm not sure. Constructing a living shoreline and group system off of Philippi Park. We're not quite done with everything yet, but we've got this part of it done, and we'll be submitting for reimbursement. Awesome. The last one that was done last week is absolutely gorgeous on there, so if you haven't seen that, go take a look. All good news. Anybody else have anything you want to share? Brianna, you want to tell people about the anniversary?
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned it last meeting, I can't remember, but it's the 35th anniversary of SWIM. And so the legislature signed the act in 1987. So I did make a presentation to our governing board at the last governing board meeting. It was very well received. We highlighted just a couple of projects, which there are many to choose from. And many acres restored, I think over 275,000 acres of watershed being treated from water quality improvement projects. So, I mean, 35 years has been a lot. We talked about the first project was a very small planting project. So it started very simple and has grown into quite complex, large restored rock ponds, kind of bayou, just a few of the Schultz Preserve. Examples, we obviously work with our cooperators within our district to make that some of those happen. And yeah, so it was very well received. I mentioned that I had some t-shirts for the TDOT staff, but yeah, it's quite an honor to work for such an incredible program and see all the accomplishments over the years, how it's grown and changed. So obviously hearing, some of the issues in this area, we're keeping our ears and eyes open for those opportunities where we can partner and look for improvements. We do have some projects ongoing, and when those complete, we can share that, or even during restoration as well. But it's nice to see the before and after when the project.
Yeah, we've certainly been part of the discussions of the SWIFT plan update for the end of the day as well. And a lot of these concepts we told it in that update.
Yes, that is still ongoing. And the Lake Tarpon one, they're kind of coincided, not planned that way, but with some delays. And so we're still working on those timelines and hopefully have the Tampa Bay one completed this fiscal year. So sometime before September 30th, and then Lake Tarpon in next fiscal year. So, trying to, since we only have so much staff, we have to do split of it. And then Sarasota Bay will be our next one.
Thanks. No one else raising their hand. Our next board meeting is February 10th, 2023. So, November 4th saying, I hope you all have a very, very wonderful Thanksgiving and happy holidays in December. And so after New Year, and I hope 2024 is better than 2023. I hope that this red tide stops me being north. Here. Sorry, Princess South, but just gonna go out there with no barrier and it's just gonna stay. Thank you, this meeting is adjourned.